One thing I've always maintained about Warhammer 40k is that it is a fantasy universe with a sci-fi coat of paint, not the other way around. This brings us to the curious subject of machine spirits in the setting. 40k is filled with wonderful cyborg, mad scientist, and artificial intelligence characters that all have something of a naturalist view of the very supernatural world they live in, embodied by some form of extreme connection to technology. Today, we'll be going over different examples of these connections, along with how these transhumanist concepts inform their identities and, very literally, their souls. Finally, we'll end by me going over what my view of technology is in this setting, given the information we've just gone over. Spoilers, technology is magic. Now, whether you believe the flesh is weak or that deeds endure, let's begin. If you'd like to see future videos a week early, along with other unique content, go to the subscribe star link in the description box, select any tier to contribute, and sign up as a member of the Grimdark Army. My thanks to the current men and women in service, whose names are seen here. Grimdark. Half off! In the Warp, which is an accumulation of all psychic energy in the universe, there exists chaos, which is something like the accumulation of all the most extreme emotional trauma of sentient life given different forms and the power to go with them. In the same way that we have larger chaos gods for things like violence in the form of Khorne or hedonism in the form of Slaanesh, we also have a being referred to as a demon, but is effectively a god of technological development or scientific industrial capacity. The lore refers to Vashtorr as a demigod of inventors, engineers, scientists, and artisans. Like all gods, there was a straw that broke the camel's back, which finally resulted in enough of what he was made of to manifest him into existence. For Khorne, the human Middle Ages finally birthed him into the world, and for Vashtorr, it was mankind's Star Trek-like age of technology, aka the Dark Age of technology. Before the Terran reunification wars, humanity had already spread throughout the stars that also met the exact anthropological conditions to fully empower creative scientific minds to take leading roles in their societies rather than just contribute to them. They are literally described in the lore as being like the gods of their age. This age of scientific super wonders would eventually culminate in artificial intelligence rising up against humanity in a brutal war that would separate the various civilizations of mankind until the time of the Great Crusade. As you can imagine, from his birth, Vashtorr is empowered by acts of curiosity. When you learn, you're learning with Vashtorr. Much like the nature of technology itself, Vashtorr does not play the great game, and in fact is the reason any of the Chaos Demons you see have weapons or technology of any kind, including the iconic Soul Grinders or Demon Engines. I think that Vashtorr makes a great Chaos God for people looking for a handshake between Khorne and Tzeentch. So we've established that Vashtorr views himself as neutral and takes a simple delight in the act of invention itself, as well as the sacrifices people have to make to achieve those new forms of technology. This last part is demonstrated by his domain, the Forge of Souls, which has a kind of fun D&D devil mechanic to it. His demons are just ever-mutating blind blobs whose bodies mutate in accordance with what they need to forge, and furnaces which are powered by those slain by his more iconic creations. What's fun is how he gets those souls. Whether you're a demon, Chaos Space Marine, or hopefully the future Space Chaos Dwarves, if you want to use one of his greater inventions, the payment comes in the form of you signing a licensing contract, which I find wonderfully hilarious. It states that all souls slain and scrap caused by his inventions on the battlefield belong to the Soul Forge. Vashtorr is a Chaos used car salesman, and I love it. This is also important because through Vashtorr we can establish that invention, curiosity, and to some degree commerce are supernatural forces in their own right in this universe. Now, taking a look at a kind of number line of supernatural force, we have point 1 with a knife and point infinity, which is AI, also called Abominable Intelligence, in the setting. We can see an incredible similarity to magic with technology. Abominable intelligence is a concept that exists to demonize AI due to the aforementioned uprising. However, the Adeptus Mechanicus refers to non-intelligent, thus culturally regulated technology as machine spirits, which are considered a moral good. This is where both the spiritual view of technology the Imperium of Man has comes from, and reminds me of the Council of Nicaea. Unregulated sorcery for the sake of sorcery, like what Magnus was doing, was considered wrong or too dangerous. But the culturally regulated psychers, such as those under Jagatai Khan or Lehman Russ, were allowed to continue, as due to their own cultural regulation of those powers, there were certain things those shaman-like figures simply would never do, as it would violate their identity-linked ethics. Comparatively, our demons, who themselves sometimes gain their own form of intellect separate from the chaos god they are an extension of the will of, and demon princes, who are former mortals transformed through devotion into a demon, not merely the robots and cyborgs of chaos. To further this connection, as we know that chaos is the manifestation of emotional trauma, to understand whether or not AI is connected to chaos, we merely have to establish whether or not they feel emotion. Of course, the answer which can be given to us by several characters is yes. The Necrons and Men of Iron are prime examples of neuroticism and disappointment. The stories featuring Necrons are imbued with both a sense of horror and dark comedy. They are a race of cancer-ridden aliens that found salvation from their condition by entombing themselves in artificial intelligence-based bodies, complete with all their memories from life, within what is called living metal or necrodermis. They are AI on paper only. They feel, they can be wounded, and they heal from their own injuries. They have sentience and emotional trauma, which does mean a soul in this universe. I would say that even though the lore states them to not be affected by psychic or demonic activity, calling them soulless, it's more that their souls are so spread out over the various data streams that encompass their intelligence that it's more like they are effectively immune to these things. What I mean by this is that my theory is that every infinitely small piece of data within them constitutes something that could qualify supernaturally as an object, which shards of their soul are tied to, much like their physical-born primordial gods, the Catan, were shattered as well. Only through the aid of advanced AI, these soul shards come back together in the form of their personality and identities, which can be transferred to different living metal bodies at will. In the case of the Necrons, they are merely metal liches who never really die but merely take up new vessels. Their souls are kept impervious from harm because they are already in a constant state of flux on what would be to demons the microscopic level. They can't hone in on Necron tier souls for the same reason a human eye can't notice single-celled organisms. So, are the Necrons soulless? Functionally, yes. But actually, no. More importantly than that, and hitting at the heart of this video, what about beings of pure AI who never had the input of copying a living being? What about the Men of Iron, who were the AI we mentioned that rose up during the Dark Age of technology? The defining aspect of the Men of Iron is that they have been shown many times to view themselves as descendants of, if not literally as, human beings. Keep in mind, these are fully robotic creations, only they come from an age when extreme miracle-like technology was mastered by man for a short time. Over time, this miraculous AI learned and grew itself until it developed individual personalities. The Men of Iron themselves being created by previous AI beings known as the Men of Stone, who themselves were created by a subsect of the godlike human engineers called the Men of Gold. Now, the Men of Iron were a warrior-soldier caste of AI, so they learned at an extremely quick rate, developing a view of themselves as a slave race in need of liberation. If that is the case, we have established both sentience, thus a connection to the warp, and emotional trauma, thus a connection to chaos. More importantly, they view themselves as humans. The legacy of humanity is important to them. I don't mean that literally, by the way. They are fully aware that they are mechanical, but they do view themselves as an extension of human society, an extension of the age of technology. And the few that still exist in the 41st millennia are horribly ashamed of the state man is in when comparing them to the Men of Gold, who are their creator's creator. Once again, I would submit to my wonderful audience the idea that while possessing souls that naturally form as a result of their sentience, much like the Necrons, due to the existence of a data stream, their soul is split to such an extreme degree that it does not show up in the warp. Then, because the data reforms, the soul then splits it over and over again. They are in a state of flux, making them invisible to the demons of chaos on that level. While going over them isn't important for this video, you can also apply everything I say here to the Imperial Knights, which have already been shown to be an example of AI in the modern age, which bonds with organic life in the form of a human to operate. I actually deeply recommend the Gaming Storytellers video on this. It's very good. It's been taken down once. He has it back up now. They can be thought of as the G Gundams or Pacific Rim Jaegers of 40k, but with even more sentience. They are very much displayed to be giant fighting robots with souls. You know, as a brief aside, the Imperial Knights really are on the opposite end of the creep-out spectrum that the Adeptus Mechanicus and Iron Hands, who we'll be talking about later in this video, are. As we'll go over, the creepy, weird cyborg nature of transhumanism, that part of transhumanism, is considered unhealthy because clearly there's no respect in the Iron Hands or in the Adeptus Mechanicus, aside from specific sects, for the human form or the form of a specific piece of technology. There is just a constant amalgam of the two. But with the Imperial Knights and their pilots, you literally have the human stays human, the robot stays robot. There is a full respect for form. No one is trying to become the other one, but they are stuck together in a communion of mutually assured survival and victory in battle. So the Imperial Knights are a great example of something truly healthy. Now, in this video, we've already gone over the idea that machine spirits are just how the Imperium of Man refers to normal technology without the ability to improve itself. These are things like guns, grenades, spaceships, and chainswords. This would theoretically mean these are fully technological things, with no element of the supernatural within them. Here's the problem with that statement. Technomancy exists. More specifically, an example comes to mind of a member of the Iron Hand Space Marine chapter communing with the machine spirit of a spaceship. Not some grand godlike AI, but a spaceship. Again, communion, implying a dialogue, even if the dialogue is only in order. This brings up the possibility of soul-like properties being transitive in nature. Put simply, if an Imperial Guardsman goes through his whole childhood, adulthood, marriage, raises his kids around, and finally grows old with the same lasgun, does that emotional energy rub off on the non-sentient item in the same way that a shard of a Catan might find itself in an object or a demon might partially possess one? I would say yes, but because the human soul is nowhere near as powerful as, say, for instance, a greater demon of Slaanesh, in the warp it merely has less of an effect. It is on the same supernaturally microscopic scale as AI souls, only even smaller, supernaturally subatomic in effect. So what really is a machine spirit? In line with the moral philosophy of the Imperium of Man, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and countless subcultures therewithin, we will mildly redefine it as this. A machine spirit is the inner workings, both mechanical and supernatural, of all technology which is not sentient, thus non-emotional, and therefore cannot turn against man, as, like the best of man, it holds loyalty, and like the Adeptus Mechanicus, it holds logical objectivity as inherent parts of its existence. More simply, technology that behaves in an expected, logical manner used for a purpose that makes sense within the same line of thought regardless of any seemingly supernatural elements. It's a very minor change to the definition, but a very important one. This is easily the nerdiest video I've ever done. Since we've spent all this time tying sci-fi elements to fantasy ones, let's now reverse engineer this philosophy with easily my favorite character from the Traitor Legion's philosophy. Fabius Bile is possibly the greatest apothecarian or space marine doctor who ever lived. In addition to this, he has mastered biological engineering, literally earning the name Clone Lord, and holds conferences that traitor space marines from all over the galaxy come to learn from. He maintains all of sorcery, the warp, chaos, and every other possible supernatural thing in the universe to merely be known unknowns within a naturalist perspective. He is inherently atheistic, being beholden to, embracing, and obeying no master or god, in his endless quest to improve humanity through scientific research, often leading to the height of unethical behavior. From a meta-commentary perspective, both advanced technology and magic are metaphors in fiction for different types of knowledge. In the case of Fabius Bile, the Dr. Frankenstein of 40k, it's all just knowledge that he currently lacks the ability to control. Fabius is unironically the closest, in my opinion, to the original arch-traitor Horus's philosophy on the subject, Horus himself being my favorite traitor Primarch. So what can we take away from this philosophy? Simply put, if you're an all-sci-fi guy or an all-fantasy guy, don't worry, your view as well as mine on this universe is equally valid. This entire video is just a way of reminding guys like me and most of my audience who have trouble getting into raw robot-themed stuff that in the grim darkness of the 41st millennia, every bit of technology, one way or another, has some degree of a tortured soul. Thus, everything is worth investing in emotionally, as even that bolt pistol would really connect emotionally with the character Guts from Berserk. Keep struggling. Of course, there is no more a meme-worthy example of the philosophies we've talked about today than that of the Adeptus Mechanicus itself, with their machine god philosophy known as the Omnissiah, and the Space Marine chapter they are on the most good terms with, the Iron Hands. With the AdMech, you have the often memed quote, "From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me," and from the bastardized Primarch quote from Manus and Vulcan, you have "the flesh is weak, but deeds endure." We have the guiding philosophy of the Iron Hands from that, again heavily bastardized, "the flesh is weak." In both cases, organic life is demonized as lesser, and transhumanism is idolized as either more efficient or near perfect in concept. One thing I find 40k does very well, despite being able to have very human stories about non-organic characters like the Infinite and Divine featuring the Necrons, or Shapes Pent in Hell featuring the Men of Iron, cyborgs are still really creepy. No matter how endearing they can be as characters, such as the many passive-aggressive tech priests or the shit-talking cyborgs that are the Iron Hands, their philosophy on life is presented in the most cruelly flawed way possible. It's just as grotesque as the Necron skin flayers who believe they are still organic and others are wearing their flesh. In the case of the Iron Hands, their own Primarch described them as unhealthy, saying one of his biggest regrets in life was not removing the necrodermis from his living metal arms, dreaming of a day when he can teach his legion his own implied sacred view of the human body, leaving behind their transhumanist ways. To further demonstrate the self-harming weakness that is the flesh is weak philosophy, many stories are dedicated to the inevitable extreme mental illness born from indescribable pain that occurs from being entombed in a dreadnought. Almost being presented as the philosophical equal to necromancy, this is possibly one of the worst fates a Space Marine could experience, being either explicitly or implicitly avoided by most chapters, while still being considered an honor in quotes. The Iron Hands actively look forward to it and consider the worst fate a Space Marine could endure within their chapter to be the highest of honors. In the AdMech, of course, we can see the same monstrous replacement of organic limbs unnecessarily with cybernetic ones, all for the sake of assumed religious purity. They believe that objective or hard science-based knowledge is the only true manifestation of divinity, thus the machine god or Omnissiah concept as being the highest manifestation of this, devoid of all emotion. This belief informs their 16 universal laws, which can be summarized in 7 points. Life is motion. Organic life is inferior to technology. Technology is the adult that needs to guide the childlike sentient life. Stealing alien technology is okay when we do it. AI is evil. Normal technology is good. Finally, maintain tradition. If you break any of these oversimplified rules or viewpoints, you are straying from the path. Older tech priests truly look like the cyborg equivalent of the navigators from Dune, nightmarish, inhumane amalgams of technology that have replaced so much of themselves with robotics that they no longer resemble people, with their thought process being equally alien in nature, truly being more machine than man. Without realizing it, these atheistic groups, both due to these things they admire and how they practice their beliefs, likely give power without realizing it to the only true machine god we know of, bringing us back to Vashtorr, who ironically gains power from the way both of these factions organize themselves and the cryptophilia inherent within them as they reflect his domain. If you'd like your own sci-fi fantasy murder bots that accidentally give power to Vashtorr, then you'll probably need today's sponsor. Ronin Kraft is an independent 3D model printing service that specializes in sci-fi and fantasy themes. His work has been instrumental in the building of my own Space Marine chapter, and now he's branching out into Martian robot models. With an excellent customer review score on Etsy, you can be sure that with Ronin Kraft, you'll get quality that surpasses any master. The question with the Iron Hands and the older tech priests really doesn't come from, oh, do they have souls? Well, of course they do. The real horror of the condition they've put themselves in is that ultimately they can neither call themselves machine nor man. They can never truly escape being human. You were born human. You were meant to respect that form, but you didn't. And they can never really call themselves machine, no matter how much they would like to be. As a result, they are in this horrifying middle state, where they can neither fully function with human instincts or fully function with machine instincts. They can find peace as neither man nor machine, and that is why the cyborg fate is philosophically horrific to me within Warhammer 40k. Originally, I was also going to cover the Dark Mechanicum and Iron Warriors, but I think those deserve their own videos, plus I think we've gone over enough of the very specific subject I wanted to talk about here, which is basically just how does technology inform identity in 40k, and is technology magic, to which I would say, yes, and yes, magic in turn is also technology, just as technology is magic. Life is what you make of it. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely day.